I slept okay. We came back in from being out at my family cabin, and so we got in at a pretty decent hour last night. Slept okay last night. Um, I was restless. It's definitely restless, um, and I still kind of feel it today. Um, I think what kind of has me down a little bit is two things. One is I I believe strongly in people until otherwise. So I start out trusting. And when that trust is disrupted, it kind of shakes me up. And so that was that. And then the other piece was I watched the debate last night, and it's I find it intellectually difficult to disconnect from what my mind is telling me about what's going on. And that's the mainly what's driving the discussion today, or the teaching today is, how do you attack the armor of a lie? And it's such an interesting thing because, you know, we often live in the experience of our stories. And when our stories are challenged, um, there's an aspect of one's identity being challenged. So it's a big deal to challenge the story, and it's a big deal to interact with people who support your story, and how to interact with people that don't support your story, um, and and then just recognizing the story itself as kind of fundamentally flawed. These are all pieces of the puzzle that I think are necessary to, or helpful to understand. And so today, I want to talk a little bit about attacking the armor of a lie. And so by the armor of a lie, it's the pieces that protect the lie as opposed to the lie itself. And so the pieces that protect the lie are largely centered around the present moment kind of stuff. So tone protects a lie, eye contact protects a lie, body language protects a lie, um, rhythm protects a lie, posture protects a lie. So the armor that supports a lie is like any other armor. It has weaknesses, and so the challenge I think that a lot of people face is if you're in a story, okay, if you're experiencing life as a story, then it's hard to recognize the process of the story as opposed to the story itself. And so the story just becomes something that you identify with. But the process of the story requires a stepping away from the story as the kind of the thing, and engaging with the process, or not so much the process, but engaging with what makes the story, uh, what gives the story credibility. And that's the armor. The armor is what gives the story credibility. If someone, if someone's saying a lie and they're kind of eyes are darting left and right, and they're shaking and sniveling, and you can tell that they're going back and forth. The lie's not going to hold up. But if the lie is presented by, smooth, present, mindful, eye contact, uh, the whole nine. If the lie is presented that way, then uh, it's much, much harder to kind of break it apart. And so there's a couple ways to do it, and I think a failing on the left, I would say, is there's just this emphasis on the intellectual side of things, like the explanation of things, um, logic, right? And on the right, it's much more just kind of body oriented. It's much more physical. It's much more heart described with the heart. It has much less to do with how you think and much more to do with how you feel. And so, in my mind, the way I would go after the left is I would describe how its presentation is something that you have to really think hard about. And you gotta really think hard about it, and you gotta explain it, and you almost gotta put it on paper. And then on the right, the position is very much, don't think about it. It's how it makes you feel. Like who makes you feel this, or who makes you feel that. So it's a disregard of kind of the intellectual part of it. It's just a disregard. So how do you attack that? Well, the armor of the left is in and of itself a kind of an intellectual hierarchy. And so I think what the right does very effectively is they just don't engage with the hierarchy at all. They just simply interact with the same kind of stories that have, been consistent and useful. You're going to raise taxes. You're going to mess up American freedom. We support free enterprise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's typically the way that the left's armor is attacked, and it always seems to be pretty effective. On the right, the armor is the presentation. So it's not an intellectual. If you go after the right intellectually, it's hard to do, because the right's not using intellect to begin with. The right's using the heart. And so what you got to do on the right, if you want to attack the armor of a lie on the right, is you've got to attack the presentation of the lie. And you've got to use a story. You've got to create a story around the presentation of the lie that makes it harder and harder for the person giving the presentation to do so without being more and more self-conscious. See, the thing about a lie is that everyone knows when they're lying. And what happens is, if they are lying effectively, the lie doesn't come out in the presentation. The presentation can remain smooth and calm. But if you're lying and you start to become self-conscious about the lie, then the fact that you know that you're lying starts to betray you. And it's a very tricky kind of thing to first get to, and second start to articulate, because in particular on the left, you have to disconnect from what's called interpolation. You have to disconnect from your ability to understand what the person's saying, and your ability not just to understand, but your kind of your motive, or not your motivation, but your almost the direct response. So you understand, you have to respond to what you understand too, right? So A is said because you understand A, then B follows. But what you need to be able to do is recognize that A said something, recognize that B is supposed to follow, that you're about to follow with B, and then jump forward or jump backward, I would say, or just jump into numbers. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, so you would literally hear A to B, you recognize that B is what you're supposed to respond with, and et cetera, et cetera. You just don't do it. You don't respond that way, and you move to a shift. So you undercut the conversation by going at the source of the story, or going at the description of how the story is being presented, how the lie is being presented. You attack that. And what that does is it disrupts the liar's flow. And you can see what happens when a liar is disrupted. It's the same thing that happens in a physical altercation. The disruption starts to mess with the plan. It starts to mess with the belief. It starts to mess with the flow. And when that happens, there's openings. And once you have an opening, then you spring forth, you strike, and that's when you start to make your mark. You cannot strike a lie that is being presented as smooth as anything. You can't attack it intellectually. It just won't work. It's too hard to get people past the way they feel about the presentation of the lie. It may be till later that they think about the intellect of the lie. But in the moment, it's the feel of the lie that has to be attacked. And the only way to attack the feel of the lie is to attack the armor around it. So again, just don't attack the lie. And so we'll take this back to kind of just the interaction within yourself, is that when you interact with the story that you're telling yourself, the kind of the story of, it's okay that I, just have these patterns and these habits because of X, Y, and Z, or this trauma, or this is what happened to me, and so this is the way it is, or this is the way I am. This is the story I tell myself. These are the patterns that I use. And you've also got, once that's developed, you've also got the body. The body becomes kind of inclined to the patterns, even if they're negative. It's weird. Even if it's a negative pattern, because it's a familiar pattern, it's easy to stay in the pattern. And so what starts to happen is that even though you know that what you're doing is destructive, because you know the kind of the pattern of it, and because patterns are so kind of necessary and so useful for the body, because those patterns are there, you just kind of stick with the patterns. I mean, you can know intellectually all you want that this is a problem, but because the patterns are still just kind of the way they are, and you've got no way to disrupt them, you just stay in it. So it's the same kind of thing. That's what the armor is. And so in the context of a debate, right, especially one like last night, you got to attack the armor. There's not enough time inside of a debate to create a intellectual, structured kind of argument that is directly confronted with a complete and other fabric, a reasoned argument in the moment is difficult to present if the opposite or the lie is coming from a presentation that looks absolutely smooth and flawless. It's very difficult because you're confronting intellect with feel, and the feel is going to, and this goes back to the kind of the individual, the feel is going to be the thing that drives. It's not the intellect that is the driver. The intellect is something that's a higher level. It takes this part of the brain. The feel, right, is back here. The safe, it's back here. So I don't know if that hit the mark at all or not. I hope it did. Let's practice. All right. First thing that's popping up for me is just my eyes feel very heavy and tired, and so I'm gonna let that be what tames my mind. I'm just gonna let the fatigue and the tiredness and the heaviness of my eyes close my eyes. I'll notice the light and shadow behind my eyes, and then shift to sense of sound. Really nothing new or unique in sound. Everything's pretty quiet. Go to sense of touch. can feel my clothing around my collarbones. I can feel my belly pushing against the fabric of my shirt. My right toe is under my left knee, and I can feel the way my right toe is open to the air. And I also have the feeling of my left toe, which is covered by my right knee, and it feels warmer. I can feel that. I feel my eyelids having sunk a little bit further, kind of all the way down. My mouth feels very clean. There's no smell. It's quiet. Let's go second bell. Starting with ground, what's beneath me. Feel my cushion. I can feel my right inner foot connected to the left outer leg. Left inner foot connected to the right outer leg. Pelvis beneath me. I notice that my ground is leaning. I'm leaning right a little bit. So when I come to my pelvis, I'll kind of make that adjustment and just find that balance point. That balance point right on my pelvis. Now, because I moved, because I shifted my whole body. It takes a lot to move the body. That means I can feel that my core engaged a little bit. So I could feel effort in my core. So when I go into my core space, I'm going to release that effort. I'm going to release my core space and allow the heart space to be kind of what flattens out the core space. So it's the lift in my, kind of the region of my heart, as opposed to the sucking into the muscles in my stomach that kind of flattens out my stomach a little bit. And I feel that length. Now coming into kind of more fuller experience with heart space, I'm going to notice my shoulder blades, move them around a little bit. Notice what happens across the chest as I kind of pull my shoulders back. There's these little moves, right? These little engagements with the body are fundamental to the kind of the brain-body connection. Now, there isn't really a brain-body connection, it's all one. But what you're cultivating by these little subtle movements and this present moment attention is a relationship between the brain and the body that communicates more effectively. And because it communicates more effectively, you're more aware of the communication going on. So that's important. I mean, your subconscious literally takes in a gajillion bits of data every moment. And from those gajillion bits, they only give your conscious mind is only getting a tiny fraction of that. So there's infinitely more going on than you realize. And by becoming present to subtlety, present to kind of subtle shifts and movements and things of that nature, by becoming present with those things, you're becoming more aware and becoming more kind of nuanced in your awareness itself. It's very important to be kind of participating with these little shifts here and there. throat space, outside of throat, inside of throat. So with the throat space, you can think about the throat as just, kind of the channel between the lower body and the upper body. But if you think about talking, if you think about making sound, I mean, that's all going on in the throat. So your throat is like this super refined, super kind of unbelievably sensitive and vibratory kind of space, right? So when you get to throat space, do the little stuff. Swallow. Feel that swallow. Notice it. Take a breath. Notice the way air shows up in the throat. You can feel the air moving in your throat. 99% of your day is spent unaware of that feel. It just does what it's supposed to do. That's really it. Take some time at the throat. Now, I typically find that when I'm going through the alignment of my body, I've turned holds back on. So I've turned holds typically in my core back on as I have gone through the steps. And so I often have to go back, recognize that I've turned it on, and turn it off. So then by the time I get to the top of my head, I've basically been letting my awareness bounce around everywhere. Now I put my attention on particular spots, so my awareness becomes kind of honed in based on where I put my attention. But the awareness as a whole is just present focused. So you can hone in on an area and then your awareness can travel to thoughts, right? So what you're trying to stay with is a present-based awareness where your awareness is diffused through the body or diffused through whatever we're kind of looking at the moment, and then becomes focused in on particular spots. And so it's like this, this floating kind of, I mean, it's invisible. The awareness is empty, right? But the second you turn your attention to something, your awareness becomes kind of focused on that. And so it's like your attention is where to place your awareness. Your awareness is the information you get from what you pay attention to. And how aware you are is predicated on how often you are awareness. Mostly you are story, right? Mostly you are story. But underneath that story is awareness. And the more you focus on what's going on in the present moment, the more your awareness will pick up. Top of the head, top of the spine. Again, here you're looking for a sense of alertness and relaxation, length of the spine up, the softening of the muscles around the face, and the rest of the muscles all the way down. So everything gets softer on the way down, but the spine stays aligned up. So that sets you up for bell 1 and bell 2. So here we are in bell 3, and always set a baseline. So check your breathing, just feel your breath as it is. Then max it out. Feel sides, breathe sides, think sides, breathe sides, feel sides. Think front and back, breathe front and back, feel front and back. Think up and down, breathe up and down, feel up and down. Put it all together. Now let's practice the fire breathing again. I think we did this the other day. Let's just do it again for a couple rounds, and then we're going to sit for a minute or so. But the fire breath is all about the exhale, and so what you're working on is establishing just this kind of flapping, or like kind of this popping of your diaphragm. So it kind of goes like this. You're all just focused on the exhale, and your body automatically inhales. So you just focus on the exhale. And I've encouraged you to, in the past, try it like this. You just do a quick 5. And so you can practice that, or you can go into it. And so what I want you to do is go through as many kind of iterations of fire breath that you want to do, and then we're going to sit for a minute. So I'll go through mine, you go through yours, and then we'll sit for a minute. So each of these steps lends itself to your body and your mind and your spirit all being engaged in the present moment, which is then the opportunity to put forth your best self. Now, in the kind of the life in the moment, right? None of this takes place over 20 minutes. This takes place over, a quick second, right? You're aware, you recognize your body, you interact, and you move forward. And so here it's much more kind of a cultivated kind of thing. So here we are, having gone through all 3 bells, and now we're at the 4th bell, which is bringing the best version of yourself forward, which is bringing something heartfelt forward. The heart, once we armor down, there's the heart, which is essentially your most powerful resource for putting goodwill or ill will into the world. And so at Armor Down, it's always about bringing goodwill into the world and challenging ill will with goodwill. It's a constant challenge. But we always have the goodwill on our side, because the reason why goodwill is always going to win over ill will is because goodwill doesn't need anything to survive. Goodwill just is. Love just is. Hate, deceit, lies, they need constant fuel to be maintained. Love just is. And so to cultivate something that requires so much other input is less effective than cultivating something that just is and brings you along with what it is, which is goodwill itself. So start with gratitude. And so you may notice that I have my hands over my heart, which kind of grounds me in the location of where I want this goodwill to come out of me. It's not an intellectual thing. I kind of frame where it's going to go with my imagination, but my intention is to kind of imagine my heart pulsating outward with goodwill. So the first is just gratitude. What am I grateful for? I'm grateful to be back at the house. I'm grateful to be back in my meditation spot. I'm grateful to just have been able to use technology to stay connected. So I'm grateful there. And then, of course, there's the opportunity to go with compassion. And compassion is reaching out with your goodwill to those who are suffering. And by reaching out, it's recognizing that suffering exists, recognizing that you yourself have suffered, and sharing a deep felt desire to help other people not suffer as much, or to listen to them, or to help them out in any way possible. This is the realm of prayer. This is the realm of life, not just being this inert thing out there, but that life is a reflection of what's inside of us. And if we can push our goodwill out into the world, it's good for us, and it's good for me, and it's good for you, which means it's good for us. So what's good for you is good for me, And so when I acknowledge the suffering of the world and try to put more of my goodwill out into it, it helps you and it helps me. So be intentional about your finish. Have a pattern. I always do second exhale. So I take 2 breaths, and on the second exhale, I'm done. And that's when the practice is over. And so what we've done, what we do every single day, is we go through these basic skills. This is the basic. This is the structure of mindfulness. This is the structure of how to systematize your best self regardless of what's going on. And the way you do that is you just follow the protocol. You follow step 1 through 4. And it doesn't matter if you do it really fast or if you really slow it down like we do in the morning. But the key is to go through those steps. And if you can go through those steps, there's a better chance that you'll bring the best version of yourself to the moment, as opposed to the story, just the story of whatever led you to this moment and why you're here and da-da-da-da-da. That story is very powerful, and that story has to be challenged. And you challenge it with the pieces of the protocol. So let me read you the stanza of today. We're on 64. So the stanza says on 64, spring forth from the great earth, billow like great waves, stand like a tree, sit like a rock. Use one to strike all, learn and forget. Man, that's some deep stuff. Deep stuff. All right, Down. Always a pleasure. See you around.